episode, we'll explore line graphs. It's called a line graph because the information is displayed in the form of a line. The English teacher noticed that Hala has difficulty writing words correctly. So she decided to help Hala read and write more words to improve her spelling. And at the end of every week, Hala would sit for a spelling test. The teacher recorded the number of mistakes Hala did over 10 weeks of time in a line graph. Based on this line graph, try to come up with sentences that begin with I notice. What do you notice? The horizontal line shows the number of weeks, and the vertical axis, the vertical line, shows the number of mistakes done. What kind of information does this graph reveal? For example, I noticed that Hala made 15 mistakes during the first spelling test on the first week. That's a lot. I noticed that on week 2, Hala made 13 mistakes. I noticed that on week 6, Hala made 6 mistakes. I noticed that Hala had the same number of mistakes on weeks 3 and 4, 11 mistakes. I noticed that the least number of mistakes is 1, and that happened on week 10. I noticed that the line goes downwards. This means Hala's spelling did improve with time and with more practice and reading. Did you come up with your own sentences based on this line graph? Together, we're going to learn how to analyze and draw line graphs. We use line graphs to show the change over time. In this case, we see Hala's improvement in spelling. While this graph shows the line going downwards, this graph shows a line going upwards. What information does it give us? Read the title, look at the numbers on the horizontal and vertical axis. This graph shows the growth of a broccoli plant over 8 weeks of time. By looking at the line, we observe how much it has grown in height, in centimeters. How tall was the plant after 2 weeks? It was 2 centimeters. How tall was the plant after 5 weeks? At 5 weeks, the point is between 5 centimeters and 6 centimeters, which means the plant grew 5.5 centimeters. At which week did the plant grow the most? We notice that the plant grew around 1 centimeter every week, except for week 4. It was 3 centimeters on week 3, and it grew to become 5 centimeters tall on week 4. The line on this graph goes upward because the plant grew continuously. So line graphs track data or information and help us observe the change in numbers over a period of time. Let's now draw a line together. Haddad's family went on a mountain hike in a cedar forest. On a notebook, the dad recorded some information about their trip. Let's transform this set of information into a line graph. The hike began at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the starting point was at 1,000 meters above sea level. At 9 o'clock, they walked 200 meters, which means they reached 1,200 meters above sea level. At 10 o'clock, they walked another 200 meters high. So how high did they reach? 1,400 meters above sea level. At 11 o'clock, the family walked 100 meters high and they've reached their destination. So they stopped for lunch at 1,500 meters above sea level. At noontime, the family was still at 1,500 meters above sea level and started the walk back down, reaching 1,300 at 1 o'clock p.m. And at 2 p.m., they returned to the starting point, which was 1,000 meters above sea level. Let's place these numbers on a line graph. We'll begin by adding the time on the horizontal axis at the bottom. Let's now add the numbers on the vertical axis. The numbers range between 1,000 and 1,500. We don't need to write all the numbers in between. Anyway, we do not have enough space to fit 500 numbers. We can skip count by 100. So we'll have 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, all the way to 1,500. Let's now add a title, Mountain Climb, and then the points. At 8 o'clock, Haddad's family was at 1,000 meters above sea level. At 9 o'clock, they reached 1,200 meters above sea level. Then 1,400 meters, reaching 1,500. At noon, they were still at 1,500 meters above sea level, then went back to 1,300, and finally back to 1,000. Next, we connect these points, and here's our line graph. It represents the Haddad's mountain hike and the distance they crossed. We see a curve and a straight line on top, representing the lunch break they had over 1 hour. We also notice that it took the family less time to walk downhill. It took them 3 hours to reach their destination on top of the mountain from 8 till 11 o'clock, but it took them only 2 hours to walk back from 12 o'clock noon till 2. I would like us to look at one last graph. How different is this one from the ones we previously saw in this episode? Instead of having only one line, this graph has two. Hadi and Danny are basketball players on the same team. This line graph shows the points each of them scored in all their games last season. The blue line shows Hadi's scores, and the orange line shows Danny's scores. So what information does this line graph reveal? Which player scored more points during the season? Did they become better at basketball with time? We can compare the scores of Danny in Game 1 to his scores in Games 2, 3, 4, and 5 by only looking at the orange line. By only looking at the blue line, we can compare Hadi's scores in Game 1 to his scores in Games 2, 3, 4, and 5. And by looking at both lines, we can compare Hadi's scores to Danny's in each of these 5 games. What information does this line graph give us? We notice that both lines move upwards, which means both players become better with time and practice. In the first 3 games, the blue line is above the orange line, which means Hadi scored more points. In Game 1, for instance, Danny scored 10 points, while Hadi scored 15. What happens in the 4th game? Both lines meet. This indicates that both players scored the exact same number of scores, which is 40 points. Who scored more in Game 5? And by how many? It's Danny. Danny scored 55 points, while Hadi scored 45 points. The difference between 45 and 55 is 10. Danny scored 10 more points than Hadi in the last game. Did any of the players score an equal number of points in different games? Look carefully at the blue line. It moves upwards, but on games 3 and 4, it becomes a straight line, indicating the same number of points. Hadi scored 40 points in both games, the 3rd and the 4th. So, my friends, in this episode, we learned how to analyze line graphs. Was it easy? Was it fun? I'll see you next time. Bye!
لمشاهدة المزيد من الحلقات زوروا سات 7 بلس.